Welcome to another episode of the CANiVISION Midwest podcast, filmed in downtown Detroit at the Detroit Foundation Hotel. I'm your host, Chris Jackson, joined today by a very special guest. We've gotten really close, John Mackewich. John, how you doing today?
Great, thanks for having me.
Or should I say attorney?
John works.
John works. Cool, man. How you doing?
You don't
today?
have to be formal here.
True. How's everything?
Everything's good. Busy.
Busy?
With Detroit coming on board, great time in the industry, keeping us busy.
That's a good problem to have. As you can see, my co-host Tatiana is still on vacation somewhere, living her best life. So shouts out to her. So I'll be holding it down again this week, but I think we have a pretty dope topic of conversation to have. So John, high level, tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and your involvement, I guess, on the surface in the cannabis industry.
Thank you. So I am a cannabis attorney in the space. I have been practicing law for the last 15 years. Corporate regulatory, working with banks, gaming, liquor, anything that's a regulated industry. And so when marijuana first became legal, it was a natural progression for me to switch over into the cannabis space. So since 2012, I've been working with cannabis operators around the country, helping them form their company, get their licenses, stay compliant, expand into other states, everything growers, processors, dispensaries, transporters, testers, real estate investors, really work with the whole industry.
Right. Well, thank you for all of that experience, man. The crazy thing is that, if not for Clubhouse, right, like you and I, we may have crossed paths at some point, but I don't think we would have had an opportunity to have the conversations that we had previous to meeting one another. You know what I mean? And it just shows, there's a bunch of experience that exists, right? Mm-hmm. But not everybody has access to that experience. But there's also the flip side of it. So, I call John our Michigan cannabis room resident attorney. Because there's a lot of people who you're one of the people that is on the app that I can actually trust, right? That what you say actually makes sense, and obviously, like, your resume proves that. But I'm sure we'll get into that conversation a little bit later. So to start, the topic for today, I was fortunate enough, and I've touched on it on other episodes, but I was fortunate enough to be a part of the MRA's Racial Task Force work group. Where we basically ultimately came up with 16 recommendations, maybe more, but drilled down to 16 recommendations that were published. Was it last week?
Last week, yeah.
Last week. That were published last week. Set the world, or Michigan, on fire, right, for a couple of reasons. But excited now that, Director Andrew Brisboe at the MRA has basically said, look, we haven't been successful in what we believed the social equity should ultimately do or be, right? And we need to fix it. And so a group of 30 to 40 people across the state of Michigan came together and made some recommendations, and here we are. Some of which will be implemented sooner rather than later. We don't necessarily have to touch on all 16, but the way that I understand that it's going to work, and it still be determined, and I know he just announced. By the way, anybody out there involved in the industry, there's a work group, right, that he just announced, that Andrew Brisboe just announced that you can be a part of. That's a social equity work group. And that's pretty exciting in that not only will that work group kind of be the barrier for anything that the MRA does moving forward with regards to social equity, I shouldn't say barrier, kind of a checkpoint. That's probably a better way to put it. But also what ends up happening is these folks are going to be responsible for helping with the implementation of these 16 recommendations, right? So anybody out there interested in that, you should definitely check that out. But let's talk about the 16 recommendations. We don't have to talk about all of them. Which ones would you say are ones that you're most excited about, and then others that you may not be as excited about? Let's put it that way.
Now, first of all, I want to say thank you for your work on that panel and everyone else. As someone who's worked with Michigan operators I think I picked up my first Ann Arbor client in 2011 or 12. As you know, the majority of this industry is white males.
Yeah.
And even since it's gone from a legacy industry to open to everyone on licensing, it's still predominantly white males who are in this industry. And I think that it's good that the state's coming together with task force to say, how do we change that? How do we have some more diversity? How do we have some more inclusion? How do we provide resources for people who perhaps feel that they can't get in the industry because they don't have the financial means, they don't perhaps have the talent behind them as far as the team, or just don't know what to do. And so from that perspective, I was glad to see it. I think I would have preferred to have it done 3 years ago.
Yeah.
But it's better now than never.
Right.
But there's some great recommendations in there. I think when it first came out, you saw what you see with any bill, cannabis or not.
Right.
They want to raise taxes. They want to tax operators more. They want to tax the product more. And, you know, that's only one of the, was it 16?
Right.
So we still need some funding mechanisms, so I think that's probably one of the reasons why they did that. But there's a lot of other great recommendations in there. I think the two that clients that, or prospective clients that have been talking to me that are most excited about are the Class A, because initially with the Class A, you could only do 150 plants, and then it was based on flowering.
And that's the Class A micro business license, right?
And now if you bump it up to 300, it's more of a business, I think, for the individual person who perhaps can't compete with big corporations to get in the space, and it allows some flexibility in how you can operate. And then the other one that always comes up, at least for me, is, John, I have this great idea, I want to get a license, I just don't have anybody who can fund it. And so by the state coming out now and saying, hey, we're going to try to put in place a mechanism whereby people can raise money, sort of like a cannabis stock exchange, I don't know what you want to call it. That now allows smaller operators to have the same leverage as some of the bigger players in the space. So I think those are the two that probably people have reached out to me and said, hey, these are what we want to see. Yeah,
I think they're calling it the MMM, the Michigan Marijuana Market, which is a dope concept. And by the way, we had a couple of weeks ago, we had Simone, who is kind of the brains behind coming up with the idea for that stock market. She was actually on our show. Can't remember what episode it was, but definitely go back and check that out because she was talking about it to the folks out there. The micro business Class A license is interesting as well because I believe what they're going to end up doing is allowing kind of an ecosystem of transfer of purchasing within the micro business license. Which also doesn't exist today, right? So as a micro business owner today, you could potentially have a business, but if you whatever, you have a bad crop, 150 plants down.
You can only have 75 of them in flower.
Exactly right. Yeah, but not only that, but you can't go purchase any from anywhere else necessarily, right? In this case, though, you would be able to buy products from other micro businesses, which I think is a step forward. No different than a craft brewery or something like that, right? So.
In the fact that not only can you get them from other ones, but it gives you leverage because before you could only grow, process, and sell yourself.
Right.
But the locations where you could do this were never in ideal locations either. And so now with, like, for example, Detroit saying, hey, we're going to clean up our green zone. You know, this church was never a 501c3, and other cities are starting to do that. Now you're actually having zones where people can actually find property, because that was the other big thing, no matter who you are in the state. It's just hard to find green zone property that fit their budget. Right. And so even if you wanted to do a micro grow, where are you going to do it?
Right. Good point. In a few of the other ones that I would say I'm excited about are the one about credentialing, right?
Education.
Continuous education. The continuous education credentialing one that basically says that, in other words, it's going to level set the market, right? Everyone is expected to have a certain level and or hours of education associated with the business, generally speaking. It's going to be in a continuous education fashion. And it will likely end up being both from a medical and non-medical perspective, right? And what that does for me is, A, it puts my staff in the best position, right, at our stores to be able to contribute information, the right information, the most up-to-date information on the people who are interested, right, as patients. That's the first thing. But it also level sets the market for how much people should be paid, right? I mean, you're seeing kind of a flux of people not getting paid very much to people getting paid well above, whatever they would be doing typically to be a part of the industry. The question is, can we get that to a point to where, once you've gotten a certain level of credentials, there should be an expectation associated with how much all of these people get paid to work at our stores. And if not, that person should understand like their value and be able to go to a different location because they aren't getting paid what they should be getting paid. So that's one of them that I'm really excited about. The other...
Well, just to interject there,
yeah,
that's one I think that, and I don't know because I wasn't on the panel, but they may have taken that from Illinois. That's a requirement in Illinois, where, before you open and after on an ongoing basis, everyone has to be trained. And we still have to remember that this is medicine. It's, perhaps something we like to take, but it still has medicinal effects. And so by requiring each of your employees to have at least some basic understanding of what this product does, how it affects your body, I think is a good thing, because it builds that trust with the community, because as we go adult use, more and more people who perhaps haven't partaken before are going to come into the dispensaries, and you want to at least have some general conformity of what a bud tender, for example, is going to say when I walk in your dispensary or anybody else.
Right, absolutely.
Otherwise, you lose that trust with the public.
True. That's a good point. And to your point, yeah, we did basically say, like, Illinois is already doing this, right? How can we take the model and make it make sense for Michigan ultimately? So you're right.
And I don't know anybody in Illinois who gave pushback when that rule came out.
Interesting.
They viewed it as, this is good for the industry.
That's what's best for the industry. I agree. Which there aren't many things that everybody can agree on, but I would say that would be one of them. The other one that I'm excited about, or one of the other ones I'm excited about, I would say, so many good ones. There's one that is an integration with local economic development, but that's also municipal education, essentially. I think probably have some carryover, but the more I'm finding, at least, the more that the people who make the laws in municipalities, because municipalities have some autonomy, right, in the state of Michigan to make decisions based on licensing types, etc. The more sophisticated they are, the more that they understand, at least, right, the more guidance they have, I think the better the opportunity for people who actually either reside in that city and or would like to participate in the industry have access to the industry ultimately. And unfortunately, there was a lack of sophistication pretty early on, right, in this process, dating back 3 years ago, right, and further. But now there's an opportunity to correct it, because there are still a lot of cities that haven't decided to opt in yet, right? So, this conversation goes back to Detroit and the Detroit Legacy Program. While I appreciate what Detroit is doing now, and it's certainly necessary to have done this up front in some ways, right, versus doing it after there's a process working and or not working, depending on who you are, versus being a brand new city, right, to opt in and say, okay, let's make sure we get this right in the very beginning, and there's equity at least for the people that exist within the city, right? I'm excited about that.
No, and I think, one good thing, cities have to, as it were, review their ordinance on a regular basis.
Yep.
And so they're going to see what other cities are doing. And I think there has to be, as it were, equity going back to the city, not just the business owners. And so that's one of the things I like about Detroit is, they're putting together a plan that say, we want to see perhaps 50% of your employees from Detroit, or 50% of your vendors from Detroit, or a certain amount of money going back to the city, or a certain amount of community hours, because we already see that, we're in Detroit. If there's a convention, people come to town, they pay a hotel tax. So, which betters the city. So why shouldn't we do that in the cannabis industry if we're trying to take an industry that has been historically disproportionate and negatively affected the city, why not take some of that revenue and redistribute it across the city?
Absolutely.
It's not that they're saying, hey, this is going to be an exorbitant tax. It's saying, hey, we want you to be basically a good neighbor.
Yep.
So show me what you're going to do for the city. And I think you're going to see more and more cities put into the place, what Detroit has. The suburbs are going to start putting that in ears and say, okay, we want more than just your $5,000 license fee every year. Show us that you're actually doing something of benefit.
Right.
Because a lot of these other cities don't have income tax like Detroit has.
Sure.
So you go into some of these suburbs, they really don't get any benefit other than the increased property tax.
Right. And that's not enough, right? Generally speaking. So, no, that's a good point. And I'll say this again. Not everybody's going to be able to be on the work group necessarily. But, for those of you, when that list gets revealed, make sure, you find a way to contact the people who are on that work group. Because you can voice your opinion. You know what I mean? You can offer your perspective as to some of the things that are working, some of the things that aren't working, what needs to be changed. So keep an eye out for that. And, look, shout out to the MRA, because there are a lot of states that came out with a social equity program and basically just said, oh, well, it is what it is. So shout out to, the state of Michigan, shout out to California, cities within California in particular, right, that are saying, all right, we didn't do it well. And even if we have a program, what can we do to make it better? And that's not always the case across the board.
No, one of the things that I think Director Brisbois is trying to do is the outreach program. Because my phone will ring all the time and say, John, I've got these lawsuits, I've got this arrest, I've got this bankruptcy, I've got whatever it is. I don't think I can get a license, so I'm not even going to apply.
Right.
But by the fact that we can go into the community and say, okay, this is what you actually need to do to get a license.
Yep.
This is how to do it. This is how you avoid predators who you're partnering with, things like that. I think I like the fact that they have social equity analysis and they could turn those documents in. They have somebody that helps them.
Yep.
There's more and more opportunities for people who, don't have lawyers,
True.
just to put it bluntly.
Yep.
To say, okay, this is how I can at least get some advice.
No doubt. I agree.
And, unfortunately with COVID, they probably didn't get the rollout that they wanted. But I think, if they continue to do that, I think you're going to get more and more expansion. But I think, my frustration, obviously better late than never, is Detroit's giving out all its licenses. And the state's going to roll out these programs. What license do I get?
Right.
They're already gone.
Good point.
And so, to me, I think these rollout programs have to happen sooner rather than later.
Right.
Because otherwise, I'm a social equity, I'm a regular person, whatever title you want to put on me, I'm going to be stuck in a small community where I'm not going to be able to make, the same amount of money as somebody who's in a bigger city. That's not to say that Detroit or Lansing or Ann Arbor aren't going to open it up further.
Right.
But at some point, the market's going to be saturated as far as licenses.
True.
And so to me, I think, the state has to roll these out as soon as they can, just to try to alleviate that.
No doubt. It's a good point. It's a good point. So, tell us a little bit about your journey into cannabis. You kind of alluded to the other industries that you participated in prior to, and still currently probably, but tell us about your journey into cannabis, where you're barred, that type of stuff. Go ahead.
So cannabis was perhaps an unlikely journey.
Okay.
I didn't grow up smoking cannabis at all. My dad was pulmonary at Henry Ford here into the city.
Okay.
So I grew up with smoking's bad, the whole 9 yards. Never smoked at all, anything growing up.
Yeah.
And became a lawyer and got in the regulatory space, as I said. So cannabis would have been the last thing that I would have thought that I would have gone into, even though it's a regulated market. But to me, you don't get many opportunities to get in on the ground floor of something in any capacity.
Sure.
This is basically 1920s prohibition ending all over again. How many times, whether you're an operator, whether you're a service provider, do you get a chance to get in on the ground floor of something and change it? As we roll out these laws in each state, you're the ones helping write the laws, come up with the policy, come up with the various ways in there. So for me, I had a client reach out and say, hey, John, can you help me on this project? I want to buy a dispensary. That was the first time. And, once I had that first client, it's like, this is an industry that I like. It's ever changing, it's revolving. and it's a great way to, learn a new area, but every state's going to come out, so I could go in different state as they come on board.
Sure.
So I've been doing it now for 8 years. This year I'm joining on the operations side, like you.
Okay.
But it's been a fun ride.
Good for you. And you are currently practicing in both Michigan and Illinois, correct?
Correct. So previously I was at a large national firm.
Okay.
Switched this past March to Marshall Mellhorn, Midwest firm based out of Ohio, but office here in Detroit and Southfield. So 5-office firm, regional firm, been around for over 100 years to help build out their Michigan and Ohio practice, but still work with clients all over the country.
Okay. You do have you do have some things going on in Illinois as well, right?
Correct.
Okay, cool. Good for you. So you mentioned having obviously like a diverse set of clients. Do you have a niche, right? What's your focus area? If someone were watching this and saying, you know what, I think that he should be my lawyer to whatever capacity, would you say that you have a focus group of people that you tend to focus on, or would you say that your clientele is pretty diverse?
I would say it's fairly diverse, representing everyone from startups to the publicly traded companies.
Okay.
But the two areas that I would say I focus on right now the most are social equity as they apply for licensing, helping social equity applicants around the country get licensed, and then other operators expand multi-state. So if someone has a brand, for example, in Illinois, helping them come to Michigan and get them in a Michigan dispensary. So there's different ways where they can do that without having an actual license in the state.
Right.
So it's really helping them protect and scale their brands.
Okay. Very cool. So what would you say are the biggest and most obvious differences between the Illinois market and the Michigan market, per your experience?
I would say that Illinois is what we call in the industry a closed market, meaning that Illinois says that we're going to give 75 dispensary licenses. So you apply, and then whoever are the best 75 get those 75 dispensary licenses.
Okay.
In Michigan, the state authorizes marijuana, and each city decides how many licenses. And so Michigan is probably more like California in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
Each city says, we either want it or we don't. Illinois, the state puts the limits on how many licenses can be out there. So Illinois, Ohio, Pennsylvania are similar in that regard. And so it's a lot harder for people in those type of markets to get in the space.
Right.
So for example, in any one of those closed states, you're going to probably spend, to turn in a good application, a minimum of $100,000 just to try to win an application. You can come to Michigan, you can come to Oklahoma, you can come to California, and as long as you meet the requirements with the MRA background individuals, you can apply in the city of Detroit. It's unlimited grow licenses. In Illinois, you have 40 craft grow, and then they're limited on the larger. You can't get one of those regardless of how much money you have. And so having that closed environment makes it a lot harder for the average person to get in, which I think is good for Michigan.
Okay, so to your point in Illinois, are they doing it per capita, right? In other words, however, how are they deciding which areas get the benefit from having a license?
So for dispensaries, for example, which is the last round of applications that they did, there were 75 dispensary licenses for the entire state. They broke it into 17 geographic regions. And for example, the Chicago metro region got 47 of them. Springfield, for example, will get 1 or 2. Peoria, 1 or 2. And so the state decided based on their own metrics how many each would get. One thing, though, that Illinois did that some of the other states didn't do is they said, okay, we're going to have up to, I think it was 500 cap. So we're going to give 75 in the first round. Once we see how those are integrated into the community, we'll decide how much are in the second round and third round, which is good because they can see where did they make a mistake, try to fix things. And even in the lame duck session last time, they said for their next bill they wanted to do maximum of 2 applications per applicant. Before there was no limit, so they could go up to 10. So now, to me, I think that's better, especially in one of those states, because you don't have one company owning all the licenses.
So, from your perspective, I'm of the belief that Michigan is in the process of normalizing, in a lot of ways, the supply versus the demand. Right? It's come around. You're seeing prices start to drop for cultivators, and I think that's because there are just more options. There's more supply in the market. In Illinois, however, from what you're saying, there's going to be a limit as to how many grows can exist, which ultimately or theoretically limits the amount of flour, right, that you
Correct.
can put into the market and supply the market with. That's problematic, right? Because a healthy level of competition means that it's priced right where it's supposed to be. I mean, in Oregon, you have the example of there being too much supply, so cultivators aren't making much money at all. But to basically, and one of the things that I've found that's been really beneficial for us, at least, is that we have the relationships, even if there was a limited supply in the market, where we can go get what we need. Right? There are other smaller, dispensaries that exist in Michigan that don't have those relationships. And so if a few of the larger companies decide to just go completely vertically integrated and decide not to sell any of their flour to the market for whatever reason, they bleed out.
Mm-hmm.
I get the impression that that's probably what's going to happen in Illinois to some extent, because basically a few of the larger companies, the multi-state operators, whatever you want to name them, those corporations already have dispensaries, they already have cultivators, they already have processors, and so why wouldn't they charge $5,000 a pound? Because they can, right? What's your perspective on that?
They've tried to address that, I think, in some regards. They have a cap on how much you can buy from any one grow.
Okay.
So it's capped at 40, but to your point, unless they open up that grow in Illinois, you're going to see those high prices, I think, in Illinois for a lot longer than we are here in Michigan. They've got 75 new dispensaries coming on board. Right now, they still have shortages in products. So, if I was in charge in Illinois, I would have created more grows before the dispensaries, at least to try to get more product to the market. Mm-hmm. But, they're going to have 75 more dispensaries, and they were talking a second round of 75. You have 150 more dispensaries coming on board. The price isn't going to go down. That's more profit to the cultivators. They have no incentive to lower it,
right?
Especially when they know that none of these new 150 or 75 coming on board are growers,
right?
And so I think Illinois, though, will address and change some of these. They've got a new legislature that, wants to fix some of these issues there. And so, I'm optimistic for Illinois. There's a lot of litigation going on right now over how they scored their applications.
Right.
But, that's one of the difference, though, between Illinois and Michigan. Like you say, prices here can fluctuate $5,000. I heard somebody paid $5,000 a couple weeks ago and then dropped down to $1,650
right.
for another one. So you can have those swings.
True story. Yeah.
And, if you got debt facilities here in Michigan and all of a sudden prices drop to $1,650 or $2,250, that's going to hurt a lot even on the grower side. Sure. To say, how do we make money
right.
and still meet our debt obligations?
Right.
But, that's the market. That's one of the good things about Michigan. Will we get to in Oregon where it drops to 400 or 500? I don't think so.
It'd be nice.
But, anybody can come to Michigan and open a grow, so
Sure.
That's the benefit of it.
Good point. Access to opportunity here in Michigan.
Correct.
Whereas in states like Illinois, there's, at least for now, right?
It's more closed.
It's more closed. Gotcha.
And I think if you wanted to say, okay, where's the closest state that I could go similar to Michigan, it's probably Oklahoma.
Right.
But there's a dispensary on every corner.
It's the Wild Wild West out there right now.
But the other good thing, that I think makes Michigan attractive to a lot of people that we don't have in the Midwest is outdoor grows.
Yep.
You can't do that in Ohio or Pennsylvania or Illinois.
That's a good point.
And so, you can come in here and outdoor grow, throw up a fence, throw up some cameras, do a naked grow.
Yep.
And you've got oil for under $100 a pound.
That's a good point. Interesting. Okay, so which state would you say is blazing the trail for the Midwest? Let's include Missouri. Maybe even Oklahoma in this conversation, right? They're like right on the teeter of Midwest versus South, right? Which state would you say is is blazing the trail that other states should look to emulate, even in some ways?
I think it's probably a hybrid between Oklahoma and Michigan.
Okay.
I like the fact for Oklahoma that if you have $2,500, you can go there and get a license. You know, you can break into the industry, you can learn it, you get your teeth wet. You may not make a lot of money, but you can start to build a brand there and come to another state. You know, it gives everybody a chance to get in there, and obviously a lot of them are going to go out of business just because of competition.
Of course.
You know, the Michigan or the Illinois, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Missouri, it's all that closed state. And New York is going to be the same way, New Jersey is going to be the same way. If I don't get one of those initial licenses, I'm shut out of the market. It's like a liquor license here in Michigan. I have to go buy one from somebody else. There's no, hey, how do I get in tomorrow? You know, if you miss the application window because you don't have the resources, you don't have the partner, you don't have the social equity, you're out. And so I think if you could take that hybrid of, you know, a Michigan and an Oklahoma and say, how do we perhaps have some caps on it, but have some flexibility where anybody can get into the market, that's the best of both worlds. And especially if we're trying to address social equity or have more blacks, you know, Hispanics, whoever into the industry, you can't have, like on the medical side here in Michigan, a lot of them didn't have $500,000 to do a Class C.
True.
They didn't have $300,000 to do a dispensary.
Right.
But if we can come say, okay, here's some programs where here's some funding, here's the stock market, whatever that is, we've now opened the market up, and you could still have caps like Detroit's having 35 lounges. You still have to apply to get one of the 35, but it makes it fair where anybody can apply.
Right. Okay. Makes sense. So, look, I mean, it's no secret Michigan is blazing the trail, but whatever. We mess with all of the Midwest states. They're all as equally important to, you know, collectively putting Midwest on the map, right? All the states.
No, but one of the things I see though is we're having federal legalization. You know, with the Democrats taking control of the Senate, you know, we'll see something happen with the MORE Act. At some point, it's going to be declassified, and really that's that rush right now. I see is how do I get a Midwest footprint? Like, you know, one store in Michigan, one in Illinois, one in Ohio, one in Pennsylvania, New York, because I think there's that rush not only to open into Michigan or Illinois, but how do I have a portfolio so that way when this does turn on at the federal level, Big Pharma is going to buy me out, or I can go public. You know, there's going to be a huge rush for that, and if you can have that larger footprint in multi-states, that's where a lot of people I think are angling for right now.
Okay. And there were some folks having a conversation just today actually with the NCIA around federal legalization and whether or not it actually happens in 2 years. The question is, and shout out to my man's Mike, he always uses the sports analogy of, are we more interested in hitting a home run or in scoring a run that way, or, you know, hitting a couple of singles, right, and driving in a run? And the question for the Democratic Party right now is, are you more interested in trying to make a statement, right, and pushing the MORE Act in other quote-unquote controversy bills in that manner, or are you looking to actually play nice with the other side, to your point, incrementally get to that point? And I don't know that they've defined what that strategy is just yet, but what I do have an impression of is, and what it seems like is going to happen, is that they're probably going to just punt ultimately to the states, so, you know, deschedule, and then punt to the states to incorporate the other things that involved opportunities and expungement, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's where I, you know, especially if they want to play nice with the Republican caucus, ultimately, because, you know, typically in midterms is when you see red versus blue shift anyway, right? When I say a red versus blue shift, I mean go from, you know,
whoever's in charge,
exactly right, swing to a different side. So, I'd be interested in see how it plays out, but now is the time, you know, cannabis related, right? Regardless of what side of the aisle you decide to sit on or you identify with, if you're in the cannabis industry, the next 2 years are going to be pivotal. right, to get some things accomplished.
And it's really not a partisan issue anymore, but I think the advocacy issue is even bigger when they try to throw things through last minute, regardless of who's in charge. Because the MORAC's a great example where we think this is a good bill because of banking, but last minute they throw in clauses that say if you have marijuana arrest, you're excluded. Nobody talked about that, but everybody said pass the MORAC because we get banking. Without realizing, because nobody reads these bills anymore before they're passed, that what we're advocating actually harms more people than it helps. But I think at federal legalization, I don't personally see that coming until we can figure out a way how they're going to replace 280E income. So it's not really how do we declassify. That's easy.
Can you explain 280E for some of the folks who may not be familiar with that?
So 280E is a section of the tax code where it basically prohibits you from writing off certain cost of goods sold. And it basically gives them that increased tax in the form of tax revenue. So unless the Senate or the House can figure out a way to say how do we replace all that money that we're taking right now under 280E, they're not going to declassify it.
That's a good point. And to your point, that's why...
Or if they do, that's still going to be there, and it's still going to harm the whole thing.
It's true. And that's why I think the conversation around rescheduling, is becoming more and more prevalent, I guess. But
I think somebody filed their declass to Schedule 3.
But
it really doesn't do anything other than move it down the schedule.
Exactly right.
It's optics. Hey, I did something.
Exactly right. Hey, we're moving in that direction. But you're right. Whether it's an excise tax or something like that ultimately gets created, unless you replace that revenue, it's going to be a hard job trying to get 280E descheduled ultimately. So, or get cannabis descheduled, I should say. So
but that'll be an interesting discussion, though, once it happens. Like, does Michigan want Illinois product coming into the state? Does Michigan want Oregon product coming in at $500 a pound? How does that affect you?
It's true.
And your ability to make money in the state where I just ship it across state lines now? So there's going to be some of that state protectionism because, California and Oregon already talking about how do we ship it across state lines ourselves. Their charter, they're probably going to end up doing it before it's even declassified. But, if you're in the Midwest or an emerging market, New York, New Jersey, Missouri, you don't want that because you haven't had the chance to get your market established.
That's a good point.
And if you can just send it into one of these markets, that just means that the states out west have controlled the whole market.
Point. To be continued. There's a lot of conversation around that, but and I think we should probably continue to explore that. But for in the sake of time, and I want to be respectful of yours. What is a legacy? We like to ask folks, right? What legacy would you ultimately like to lead and or leave, right, when it comes to the cannabis industry?
I think for myself as an attorney, and I think most attorneys in the space would say this, is the legacy that we see by being able to help you get generational wealth. Taking a social equity applicant who doesn't have the same as what everybody else has, to be able to get them licensed, to be able to get them up and running. That's generational wealth for them. It's not a 9-to-5 job. It's not a salary. So every time I can bring somebody on board, it's potentially life-changing for them. To me, it's fun, it's rewarding, but to be able to see what it does in their life, their family life, the community life, it's rewarding to say, okay, this person hit the finish line for whatever they're trying to do. And obviously they're not all going to succeed and they're not all going to get rich. But, just being a small part of the process where, we're changing lives just by helping somebody get a license.
Right.
Helping them get up and running.
Right.
We've got really one chance in each state to get into this industry at this price point, at this opportunity level. And, the more of them that we can do that, to me, it's better for the community. It's better for everybody around. So, I take pride in that.
That's what's up, man. I appreciate that. John, thank you for being with us today, man. Thanks for taking time out of your evening to come and hang out and talk cannabis. I know we do it a lot already in a lot of the social rooms we're in, but it is always nice to have a more poignant and direct conversation, man. So thank you for being here.
Thank you. It's been a privilege.
Absolutely, man. And thank you to all of the folks who tuned in this week. Hopefully we're continuing to add value. Our goal is to really bring people up to speed with what's happening in cannabis, particularly in the Midwest. Thank you for every follow, for every mention, for every share. We hope you continue on this journey with us.